Good evening, fellow human beings. I hope you were doing wonderfully this evening. Welcome back to Restitching the Tapestry. My name is Donny Winter, and I am joined by my dear friend Ari Whipple. Hello,
Hello.
Ari. How are you this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Always. I'm always excited to have you. So if you've not checked out Ari's channel yet, their channel is called Strange Nothing. So please go check out their videos. They do vlogging style videos talking about mental health, identity, and a variety of other topics. So it's very interesting, very engaging, and the highlight of my day usually. So please go check that out. So we're going to wait just a minute or two here just for people to tune in. Um, I know my subscribers are getting into the habit of me actually doing live streams again because it's been like a year since I've done them. So it's like I've been getting messages of like, oh, wow, I didn't know you were doing this again. Surprise. Surprise.
I know,
Um,
I've been really excited.
Same. That, not to mention this like StreamYards, by the way, if nobody has ever used StreamYard, shameless plug for this platform that I'm using. I'm not being paid to make this plug, by the way. I'm just doing it because I love this platform, but it makes streaming very user friendly and it makes inviting guests very simple. So I would strongly recommend using it. It's free. And so far, it's been pretty high quality. So
Yeah.
thumbs up for that. So that makes me super happy. Um, all right. So we are going to get started with today's episode. So, first and foremost, before we go any further, I think it's important to note that many different groups of people witness different types of atrocities, whether they're large or small, and these atrocities tend to fray the social fabric around us. And much of the time, many feel powerless and do not really know how to address it. And this fray has gotten worse with the rise of social media, being able to share trauma and having it go viral where people can watch it unfold in real time on a mass scale and share in collective grief and outrage. So that begs the question of what can we do to mend the communities that have seen considerable tragedy, most of which privileged groups have caused, and many who won't admit their personal involvement. So let's together work on restitching the tapestry through conversation, creativity, and action. And we are having these conversations for the sole purpose of educating, for the sole purpose of just developing a better understanding, because truthfully, we're all learning still. Like there are many different things that we may have never come across or different sets of experiences that we've never witnessed that may help us understand different sets of experiences that people face. So that's why we are doing Restitching the Tapestry. And I'm really glad that you are here to join us through our really, I don't know, I feel like engaging conversations. So
Yeah.
the theme today is putting the plus in LGBTQ plus. So Ari, my friend, this was your idea to come up with this phenomenal title. I absolutely love it. So could you explain what you were thinking when you thought of it?
Well, I think that okay, so we talk about LGBTQ rights, but I don't think that we talk about all of the whole tapestry of LGBTQ, like the plus part of it. Like I think that we don't talk about the extra stuff. And I don't think that we talk about trans rights enough, and I don't think that we talk about a lot of the a whole lot of the issues enough. So I kind of wanted to deep dive into more of these issues, and I wanted to talk about the history of pride more, and I wanted to talk about just our personal experiences, and I wanted to talk about you know our personal histories, and you know just a myriad of topics.
Well, I love that. I think it's brilliant because, well, first and foremost, I know I've seen a lot of people get very discouraged over the fact that the pandemic has really complicated pride across the entire world, and I think that's allowed people to just kind of hide away and discourage themselves from having important conversations, educational conversations about this. So I like, first of all, before we delve deep, I want everyone to know that just because there's a pandemic complicating pride events doesn't mean that we can't still educate and talk about the history of pride and
Pride
talk
is in your
about.
heart.
Exactly. Pride is in each of us because we've all gone on this journey of self-acceptance, usually against considerable adversity. So that should be celebrated regardless if there's a parade to celebrate it, or um, conferences, group panels, anything to that effect. Like it could even be something as simple as just a conversation like this, right? So, Ari, before we delve further, I think we should have a walkthrough of the history of Pride. So, would you like to walk us through that and explain how it's grown from its origin to now?
So there were several riots back in the early 60s. So you had things like the Compton's Cafe riots, uh, which happened in San Francisco, uh, in the Tenderloin district, which was one of the first riots. Uh, and then you had the Stonewall riots, which led to the gay liberation movement, uh, which led to pride rallies and pride marches every year. But yeah, before Stonewall, there were a lot of these bar raids, and because gay men and lesbian women were meeting at bars, and they were cruising, you know, so
Mhm.
they were getting together, they were trying to hook up. It was kind of like a hush hush. It was really like, you know, they were meeting, but it was sort of like illegal.
Yeah,
So
it was
they were
dangerous, right?
it was
Because,
dangerous.
I mean,
So
yeah, much of
so
these riots
sometimes
started because of the fear and because of the reality of police brutality.
so sometimes they knew about the raids, but sometimes they didn't. So, and usually it was you get, from what I heard from the documentaries that I was watching, they would just arrest you, you would go to jail, and that would be it. But sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes they would beat you up, and then you kind of got, you know, pushed around. Um, but it wasn't just gay men, it was also trans women that were getting kind of roughed up a lot. So it's just this like mix of a community of people who were getting, you know, roughed up by the cops. And I don't know if you know of the term tenderloin. Tenderloin is a term for community in which cops know that there is illegal activity taking place, and they're allowing it to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening in San Francisco at the time. They're allowing this illegal activity to take place where uh, there's homosexual and gay activity taking place, and they're allowing it to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So uh,
Well, yeah, a lot of that. I mean, I know they would use that to their advantage sometimes, which I think has partially to do with that term, if memory serves me correctly, because it's been a while since
well,
I've
because
read about that.
there were showgirls and stuff. They were not showgirls, but there were dance halls and stuff where
Mm,
they would go to, and so they knew the owners, and so it was sort of like a mutual respect.
right, right. And
So
a lot of the times those people in those types of situations would stay safe,
mhm,
um, compared to, others that didn't have that like police affiliation, you know.
right,
Interesting.
right. But so yeah. So the funny thing about Stonewall that I found is I tried to find a documentary about the Stonewall riots because I was like, I really am interested to know the actual history of Stonewall. And here's where it gets really interesting about Stonewall. Hey, Igni, we just got started, so we're just talking about the history of Pride, and we're just talking about the Stonewall riots. So, the interesting history of Stonewall is that it kind of is passed around as an oral history. So, there's actually like not a concrete history of Stonewall. Like, everybody says, who threw the first brick at Stonewall? And so, like, there's actually not a really definitive history of Stonewall. Like, nobody's actually quite sure who threw the first brick at Stonewall, first of all, and they're actually not even sure it's actually a brick that they threw at Stonewall. It actually might be a rock or a shot glass or a shoe. So there actually like is several different histories of like who it might be and who it might be, and like a lot of different stories, a lot of different mythologies passed around from different videos that I've watched. So, like, it actually is kind of an interesting bit of history, like who it actually might be and like what might have actually happened. We do know that there may have been a Rockette group that did a song and that they got beaten up by police because several people have repeated this song in several oral histories. And so we do know that this might have actually happened. So, like, it gets these stories get repeated over and over again, like this mythology that led to the Gay Liberation Front uh, for the LGBT movement. So it's just this like mythologized like riot that happened over several days. We just know that something major happened over these periods of nights, that like the police were involved, people were throwing rocks or something, bricks maybe from a construction site nearby, shoes, maybe shot glasses, something was thrown, police were involved. It was a huge ordeal. It was this heavily mythologized thing later on. Stories got overblown, stories got changed. It was only happening to the people who were there, but like later on, that number dwindled down, it expanded, it got changed. Who knows who was there? Who knows who wasn't there? People's changed who was there. You know, it
Hmm.
just it it was like you were there, you weren't there, maybe you were there, maybe you weren't there. It's just this like fluctuating memory in the minds of the people. So and it's very strange when you talk about what actually happened at Stonewall because there's no definitive history, and I find it so fascinating because it's so important to the LGBTQ plus community, because it was the beginning of our community asserting its rights and asserting itself, and saying no, we need rights for our community, and no, we will not let the police push us around anymore. And so I just I find that so fascinating that like the one thing that we need to be definitive is so heavily mythologized that we can't even conceive of. It's just orally passed around as this like this almost like a beautiful fairy tale.
Hmm. I love how you framed that. I love that. Oh, Taylor is on. Hello, my Taylor. She's my dear friend, and says, "Is history ever definitive?" That's a good question. Building off from what you were saying, Ari, I believe a lot of that also can connect with the fact that there are a lot of younger LGBTQ plus people who really aren't super familiar with the history of our community, right? And I think much of that has to do with the fact that it's an aspect of history that's really not discussed significantly because it didn't drastically affect a larger group of people, right? It's affected um, smaller collective groups. To our groups, it's unbelievably significant, but because these larger groups didn't really have any connection to it. I feel like that may have something to do with the fact that it's very kind of this nebulous type of mythology, in our history. So that's another reason why I think pride is important, and I think this conveniently transitions us into talking about pride being important because as people in the LGBTQ plus community, I know you can attest to this, we always hear people say, why do you need pride? You have rights. Why isn't there a straight pride month? That one drives me bananas.
Oh,
Like,
it
I'm not
drives
even.
me crazy.
And the truth is, we have pride still because we need to be vigilant in not only celebrating how far we've come and how much we've survived, but also showing these larger powers or dominant groups of people that, hey, we're here, our lives are significant.
And
And
but they still don't have all the rights.
exactly. That's another reason why we need pride, though, because pride is what helps facilitate many of those conversations, too.
Like in the polyamorous community, that's part of the plus in the LGBTQ plus. You can still be fired if you are polyamorous. You can be fired if you're transgender. You can be fired for a lot of things if you're found out. That's something that's in the Supreme Court right now for a transgender person. She was Amy Stevens. She was fired when they found out she was transgender, and it's in the Supreme Court. She actually just died last month before they came to a decision on her court case, and we're not sure if it's going to affect the case or not. Um, but she held out as long as she could, trying to wait for a decision on her case, whether or not that if it was acceptable for a job to be able to fire her for being transgender. And I think that it's not right. I think that you shouldn't be able to fire somebody just because they're trans. Uh, but the Supreme Court is holding off on a decision on something that morally I think is, you know, clear cut and dry, but they still haven't quite made that decision yet.
Hmm. Right. And Taylor noted in the comments that rights don't equate to respect. And I'm going to come back to that comment here in a second because I think that's very important to acknowledge too. Going back to this court case and to rights as a whole, especially with regard to including the LGBTQ plus community in like different language with regard to accommodating rights in our country. A lot of the problem that I've seen on the federal level is that federally our government likes to kind of pass it off by saying, "Oh, well, we'll let the states make the decisions on who they include with regard to rights," instead of just using their collective power as a means to be like, "Okay, we're going to pass this. All of these different people should be included in like these different bits of languages or language associated with rights." So, and we can see that some states tend to be a little bit more progressive with that inclusion, whereas other states are not. And like the inconsistency, that also causes a lot of complication for different groups of people, especially transgender people.
Well, within our lifetime, we saw gay marriage become legal, and
Hmm.
that was like a huge ordeal. That was within our 20s. We saw gay marriage become legal,
Oh, and that
and that
was
was
monumental. Like, I mean, if memory serves me correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that before federally they made the decision to legalize gay marriage, they like were just giving the power to the states to make that determination. That's why like California early on did it and a few other states. And then of course,
and they had domestic partnerships before that where you could just have a domestic partnership and you were just like living together, and
right,
that was sort of like, but it wasn't the same thing as being married because
right.
it didn't quite equate to like, in some states, you could be married and that you had some rights as marriage, but then some states had a domestic partnership, and it didn't quite equate, and, like, you couldn't, go across state lines, and it didn't quite work out, and it was just this weird, wonky system, and I remember, like, being a journalist back in 2005, writing, opinion pieces about how I thought that gay marriage needed to be legal, and,
Mhm.
like, I just remember, like, thinking, like, "This is wrong, this needs to be legal," and this is back when I was a s a cis straight woman going, "This needs to be legal."
Mhm. Well, and the thing is, like, I think a lot of people like, I'm gonna just say this, it's kind of divisive, but we're all about divisiveness. Um, we clearly understand and acknowledge that the reason why the government created domestic partnerships was to just create a placeholder because they thought that it would satisfy people and shut them up, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And when that was met with resistance, that's, I think, when the larger conversation started happening. And I think that that was in the mid 2000s where that became much more of a
It was kind of
commonplace
like the
topic.
separate but equal thing. It was like you can have your marriage, but like not. And there were a lot of people in the gay community who were like happy with the domestic partnership because it gave them some rights, but not all of the rights.
Hmm.
But like, because some people in the gay community were like against gay marriage because they were like, why do we need to get married? Like, we don't need to get married. Like,
Yeah. But see, it's interesting because I do like I'm gonna mention the term straight privilege because I think that that is, of course, a type of privilege that a lot of people don't really talk about often. Um, but I know that especially early on, like in the mid 2000s, a lot of LGBTQ plus people were influenced by the privilege of straight people in their lives, right? Like straight people would kind of disempower their LGBTQ plus, friends, family, and colleagues by saying, oh, well, like it's not like the religious definition, or it's not like what religious marriage would be, because a lot of people focus on marriage being like the religious union, right? Whereas I think for a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, it's just simply being acknowledged by our government, by the powers that be, that, hey, we are people too who are in love and who want to have this type of partnership that's validated by something bigger.
and have access to health insurance and have uh have tax things and have some of the legal benefits of marriage. It's not just religious, there are legal benefits to being married. It's not just a piece of paper. Yeah,
Hmm.
it, re- it's not just a religious thing, it's also a legal representation, and that's what the gay community was fighting for, is that legal representation of marriage, and that's what they got, and it's important that they did also get some of the religious side of that, and there are religious ceremonies that
Hmm.
the gay community does do now, but mostly it was that they wanted the legal side of things, and that was important.
Right. Taylor, which by the way, I totally just realized that I can do comments like this. I can just so
Ooh,
it's a lot easier. So like, because I know everybody can view them in like the comments bar, like when they
I
rewatch the
love
stream.
it.
But this is really nice. So Taylor, not to put you in the spotlight for a second, but this is an excellent comment because you say that in a system where legal lines are often colored over by religious doctrine or values, it is no surprise that change happens at a snail's pace. Religions have money, power, and influence. And I couldn't agree more with that because, I mean, the truth is the reason why the federal government has and state governments have been so hesitant in the past to grant rights or to grant marriage rights, it's because they didn't really want to contend with the large religious institutions giving them flack for it or protesting it, right? So that's why they would like try to compromise and be like, oh, like uh domestic partnerships, like this is kind of a go-between, like we'll satisfy both groups of people. And really, to me, that was just kind of them throwing in the towel, and not
Yeah.
really taking any responsibility.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting that you mention that we're talking about domestic partnerships and rights with that, because it's been a few years ago, but several years ago, there was a video that went viral. I think it was on Facebook, about a gay man whose partner had died in an accident. And unfortunately, because they were in a domestic partnership, like he did not get any type of, say, like insurance compensation from
Mhm.
his partner passing. He did not like get any type of survivance rights, any type, like he wasn't even allowed to attend the funeral of his partner because the family was not accepting.
That's how it went, yeah, stuff like that
And
happened on the reg.
it's so sad, and I don't think a lot of people really understand. Like, people think that, oh, well, you have, marriage rights, but
No.
in some states, even though we have the right to marry now, sometimes, like, say, like, the survivance benefits and, like, rights aren't acknowledged in conjunction with family, which that's unbelievably glaring, and that's something that still isn't discussed. Say we have a partner who is in the hospital, depending on the state that you're in, that hospital can turn you away if you're not designated as being family according to that state's uh, set of policies and language, which is it's still very unsettling. And that's why I think it's important for people to understand that there's still a lot of work to do. There's
Yeah.
still a lot of work to do. So,
Yup. It's it's not clear cut always. It's not easy. So,
right. Well,
um,
oh, go ahead.
no, no.
Well, I was gonna transition us because I realized that we're like 30 minutes into our stream. We've been having some really awesome conversations. So that, always a fun thing, right? So let's move a little bit forward to talking more so about transgender rights. We've already been talking about job firings. I don't think we've touched extensively on bathroom rights or military rights or even housing rights quite yet. So did you want to like talk to us a little bit about that first?
Yeah. So I had bathroom rights came up a lot in 2015, 2016, because President Obama did an executive order, and he made it so that high schools were made it so that if you were in high school, you could use the bathroom of your choice depending on your respected gender. And it was caused this huge uproar. What are you doing, Obama? And it's like this is not such a huge deal. This just makes it so that if you're transgender or non-binary, you can use the bathroom of your choice. And it just means that if you have a unisex bathroom, you can use the unisex bathroom, or if you have if you're transgender girl or female or woman, you can use the women's bathroom.
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't. It's such an easy concept. I just don't understand. Like, nobody watches you pee. It's like
Well, this I think this goes back to Taylor's comment about rights not equating respect necessarily. And much of it, from my observation, has a lot to do with the fact that many of these groups, like these larger groups, get really offended over LGBTQ plus people getting additional rights because it doesn't affect them in any way, you know. So I, in many ways, and I've heard people like make this statement before, and it baffles me. But like, oh well, they're getting the right to do this however they want to do it. Why don't we have a similar right? Why can't I just go into a women's bathroom? You know?
And I think it goes back to like this whole theory that they're just a man in a dress, that this is some
Hmm.
like farce, and it's not. This is a woman going into the woman's bathroom, and like I don't understand like where their warped thinking comes from, and like where
Well, I think a lot of the warped thinking comes from the fact that much of this is a conditioning. You know, much like white privilege and racism is a systematic conditioning. Like being homophobic or transphobic is a
Taylor, you're
conditioning.
right. It's a basic right.
Yeah, I agree, Taylor, completely. It's a
Did I say
conditioning.
additional rights? I meant it's a basic right. You're
I can't
right.
remember. I think I may have said additional rights. If I did, that's my bad. Um, but I think like it's largely conditioning because over the past however long, like hundreds of years even, any type of identity that is outside of what one would label as traditional gender identity or sexual identities have been labeled deviant or predatory by larger groups of people who are made uncomfortable by people who exhibit any type of difference. And I think that warped thinking is much deeper. It's rooted far more than people often realize, which is why there are just some people who even over like granted bathroom rights, it's just
I
an unthinkable thing for them to process.
I just think like the latest, like most recently, like with J.K. Rowling, she's like
Oh my
showing
God.
exhibiting the behavior. Like, I just can't recently. It's just like so much. I can't. I just can't. It's just. I just. It's. You just think that people are better than that, and like they just prove that like they just have no. They just prove time and again that they aren't on your side,
Hmm.
and that you can't trust them to be on your side, and it's just it's really sad.
Yeah, I agree completely. Speaking of J.K. Rowling, what what really upsets me about her recent unsettling comments that are very transphobic,
Well, it's not recent, she's been doing it for over a year
a
now.
a pretty, yeah, a pretty long history, but there are like recent ones that have cropped up over the past week that have really caused another,
Incendiary comments, yeah.
yeah. And it really frustrates me that she painted herself as being an ally to the LGBTQ plus community, especially when she would, go out on social media and say like, oh, well, this character is a part of the community, and then turn around and make statements like she recently made. And now she's trying to justify her statements by providing like source material. And I was doing some research today. One of the sources that she used was like wordage from a known person who essentially was a significant force in gay conversion therapy. And that made it even more concerning. So why would someone who's trying to correct their wrong justify themselves and not examine the source material? Uh, Granted, the atrocity is far deeper than that. Like the fact that she has literally exhibited transphobic behavior. It
Oh,
is unthinkable. Like it, and the fact that this person's such a huge role model for a lot of people, that's very damaging. And I'm glad though that a lot of people are speaking out against her. Like I know a lot of the cast of Harry Potter, for example, they're making statements and kind of like
this is
going
wrong,
against what
yeah.
she's saying. Yeah. So it's just sad when you see people that you really respect lower themselves to that extent, you know.
Yeah, it's just so disparaging because it's like, you know, I have a Harry Potter tattoo. Like I didn't get the tattoo because of Harry Potter. I got it because it was a group tattoo. Like, you know, I read Harry Potter. I liked
Mhm.
Harry Potter. Like it's Harry Potter has influenced my life in certain ways. So it's just like, I don't know, just to yeah, it's just
Well, it's really difficult to navigate because, I mean, those stories have been empowering for so many people,
yeah.
you know, and have shaped so many people. And a lot of people are really struggling with the fact of like, should we divorce the author from the actual work, still respect the work, but denounce the author, or do we, in a way, denounce all of it, right? I don't know
Mhm.
the correct answer to that personally. It's still something that I'm very much trying to work through too. I believe it's still possible to love the product, but also denounce the person, the problematic person who created the product, right? But that's just me,
It's
though.
it's difficult. It's difficult to navigate.
Taylor says, I continue my goal of being blocked by J.K. Rowling. And Igni says, I used to not want to read Harry Potter out of pure disinterest, but reading about her recent tweets and whatnot really grounded my decision to not support her material. Understandable. Igni also says, one of my best friends is trans and my sister's girlfriend is trans. My best friend is a Harry Potter fan, and this must be really hard for her. Yeah, it is. Like, I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
Yeah, I'm non-binary and it's just like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of a cluster right now.
Right.
It's a
Rex
mess.
Rex Trek commented saying, but always remember, did the person say it with malice in their heart?
Yes.
I
Yes.
would say so. Like I think in J.K. Rowling's ideal world, I think she has convinced herself that it isn't malicious intent. But truthfully, from the perspectives of transgender people largely, and like, keep in mind, I'm not a part of the community, I can't speak for them. But according to many of my friends who are transgender, these are very malicious things because not only does it erase the experiences and existence of transgender people, but it further normalizes the fact that, oh, well, transgender people aren't actual people. Yeah.
Right.
And Taylor
Intent does
says
not negate
intent,
effect.
that's yes, exactly. Like, yes. So I don't know. Like it's really frustrating, and I am very interested to see what happens with J.K. Rowling because I know that there have been talks about her continuing producing more stories in that franchise. So we'll see how well that goes. Yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho, so let's talk a little bit more about transgender people in the military.
Oh, yeah. So Trump made it illegal for people in the military to not, made it illegal for people to be in the military. And this is important because um, transgender people need to make money. And one of the ways that they made money that was easy for low income persons was to join the military. Um, like, you need to make money, joining the military was easy, and you could do that. So it cut off for a whole social class the ability to make money.
Mhm.
And so this was, you know, it cut off for the GI Bill, it cut off a lot of social programs like the vet affairs, it cut off all of these social programs that you get after you get out of the military, while you're in the military, uh, all of those things. Um, it made it so that basically, like, he cut off a whole livelihood for a whole social class of people, and it was just so, it was gutting almost,
Mhm.
like, and he's been doing that in a lot of social programs, um, for the HUD, the Housing Urban Development. Um,
Mhm.
he has made it so that it's been really difficult for, uh, you know, um, for transgender people to get housing. And he's been making it difficult for transgender people to basically, like, so he's making it hard for them to get livelihoods. He's making it hard for them to get housing. Uh, he's basically making it difficult for them to live, and that's why you get things like what I see on Twitter, which is the trans crowd fund, where you see like young people who are like in their late teens, early 20s. They have no jobs, they're trying to get their top and bottom surgeries, they're getting kicked out of their houses, they're broke, they're scrambling for money, and they're all suffering. And they're on this trans crowd fund trying to ask for help. And it's not just one or two people, it's thousands of people. And I
Mhm.
would go on this hashtag on Twitter, and I would just be overwhelmed by how many people are like, I need help. I need help. I'm getting kicked out. I'm about to get evicted. I'm need money for my top surgery. I need money for my bottom surgery. I need money for this medical expense that just came up. I need money for my car that just broke down. I need money because I got fired from my job. I need money because of this. I need money for this because I can't afford my rent. Like, it comes up all the time, and it's because trans people have a harder time living because of the fact uh that they're uh um
Well, their
uh
access is limited, not to mention they have so many roadblocks.
so many roadblocks.
Yeah, and what really frustrates me, especially, regarding transgender people in the military, and I've had this argument with a few people even in my own life, like, a lot of people were resistant against them being allowed in the military because it's the perception that, "Oh, transgender people are using the military as a financial means to, get medical procedures done that help them fully feel as though they are their identity," you know? And and it angers me. Like, I think it's an atrocity to say anything like that because, again, it just comes back to the fact that these are people who don't understand
They
or don't
don't.
even try to understand what it feels like for someone to be someone that they are not.
But they don't understand what opportunities the military offered for people who were trans, that it
Mhm.
gave them the ability to lift themselves out of their social class. Um, that maybe they were kicked out of their parents' house and that they were suffering, that it was giving them housing, that it was giving them a steady paycheck, that it was giving them health insurance that they could get their top surgery done, that it was giving them the ability to maybe go to college and better themselves in the future. And Trump just took that away.
Mhm. Yep.
So I just it makes me really sad, and I'm hoping that with the next president, he'll be able to give that back to them, uh, well, us, but to give it back to us,
Right.
because I don't want the next generation to not be able to have that opportunity. But, I don't like the military, but I do like what I I'd rather have there just be a universal basic income with all of those social programs and that they don't have to go into the military anyway, but that's a whole 'nother conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. That's like kind of circulating back to why pride is so important as well. Pride helps make people aware of not only these issues, but it also makes people aware of how they can help these different groups of people. And we're probably going to touch on this again at the end of this live stream, but in the description section of this video, there's going to be a link that directs viewers to different charities that support different groups, like transgender people, like especially with regard to housing or education. There's some charities that focus on like genderqueer people specifically. Like there's a whole variety. So I would definitely encourage you, if you can, to do what you can by donating if possible, because or at least even sharing some of the charities around, because in these difficult times when a lot of these people are denied access to things, many of these different charities are actually kind of stepping in and alleviating that difficulty a little bit in whatever way they can. So definitely check those out for sure.
Taylor, so my answer to your comment about the military escaping their prior lives, the reason why I was having a problem with it is that it leads to a military industrial complex. And I was talking about having just a universal basic income where we could just get, we don't need to use the military to have people have all of the things that we need, that we could just give people money and that they can survive and just have health insurance and all of the things that they need in order to survive, so they don't need the military.
Right. I think
So,
adding to that too, that like the way I'm interpreting this comment is that a lot of like cisgender heterosexual people believe that the military is an escape as well, like a financial escape. So if they can do it, why is it such an injustice for transgender people to use those resources to advance too, right? Because that is what the American dream is, right? But of course, to cisgender, heterosexual, white people, like the American dream is largely considered reserved for those who are most privileged. That's why they continually suggest that, oh, well, like these groups of people shouldn't have access.
right. But I'm getting into a whole nother conversation about the military industrial context on something else completely where big,
Oh
big
gosh,
idea conversation about
that just gives us another video idea. A future episode, my friends.
Whoa.
So, let's talk a little bit more. Like we technically have 12 minutes left, so we're gonna make the best of it.
So let's talk some personal stuff about it. So, Donnie, let's talk about your history. I want to hear about your story a little bit.
Okay,
So,
what? Go ahead.
so, like, when did you know you were gay?
I've known of my gaiety since I was in elementary school.
Wow.
Honestly, yeah, I always knew I was a little bit different. I knew that, like, I think even as a child, like I found myself like emotionally drawn to boys.
Mhm.
Um, and as opposed to girls back at that age. And then of course as I slowly grew up and hit puberty, that transitioned into like, desires for the same sex as well. But yeah, I've known it since I was a little kid.
See, I didn't know I was bisexual probably until my 20s, and then I kinda questioned that until probably about my 30s.
Hmm. Well, it's and that's what makes sexual identity very interesting. Is it's definitely a spectrum, and in many ways, I feel like it's very much more fluid for certain people and much more concrete for others. And I think it really just depends on life circumstances, you know, as to when people discover these types of things. That's why I had someone a year ago come out to me, and they're in their like mid to late 30s, and they were really upset at themselves for coming out late. Like they deemed it like I came out so late. And I like
Yeah,
and I
I
responded with, I was like, is there a right time to like is there a designated right time for one to come out? Like I think
yeah,
one
I
comes
feel like
out.
I came out so late in 2016. I was,
Mhm,
33, and I was like because I had intimacy with a woman back in 2004, 2003, and then I was like, "No, I'm not bisexual," because I wasn't attracted to that woman specifically, so I was like, "No, I'm not bi," but I kept having all these feelings for women for the next, like, 10 years after that, and I was like, "Well, maybe."
mhm.
And then 2016, I was like, "Yeah, I am." But then when I came out, I was like, "Why did I wait so long?" I'm so old now.
Well, I think it's kind of conditioned in us by our community that it's important to come out at a certain age. Like I feel like a lot of people think that we should come out like when we're a teenager, you know. But the truth is not everyone is in the safe like is in a safe social situation that allows them to do so. And for some people they're not in a situation where they're able to examine their drives and their desires as a means to, actually put them into practice, right? Because some people, I feel like, understand their sexuality more concretely if they act on it, if they, say connect with somebody. So I it's taken me years to come to this realization, but I really think that there can't be an age attached to when it's acceptable to come out, because there are so many variables involved, and I think part of the challenge is understanding that everybody has different sets of variables, you know.
And that's why Pride's important every year is for little flowers like us to reassert ourselves every year for those who came out a long time ago, and for new flowers like us who are shy to come
Mhm.
out and be like, "Yes, I guess I do. I am
Well, and the
bi."
truth is, it's so much easier to come out when you are surrounded by people who are supportive, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention, I know, like, 'cause I have quite a few bisexual friends as well, and pansexual friends too, where many of them are sometimes afraid to come out to other people in the LGBTQ plus community, because even within our own community, there is a lot of, what's the right word? Gatekeeping, I guess. Like, oh well, like you're just greedy, you're not bisexual. Or like I see people all the time make the joke of like, oh, if you're pansexual, you're you're attracted to kitchenware, like to kind of like dismiss it in a way. And I think that like we laugh about it now, but there are people who used to say things like that and sometimes still do, and do it as a means to, in a way, erase, right? And including asexuality, that's another one that I think a lot of
Oh,
people
yeah.
don't
Like, they say a
acknowledge.
lot of, like, really stereotypical things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's gotten a lot better in the last couple years that, like, people are starting to, like, wake up about the things that they say. Sometimes you'll hear things, but, like, I feel like people are starting to, like, check themselves more, and,
Hmm.
like, the community's starting to be more conscious about what they're saying and who they're saying it to, um, about the identity politics of things, but, like, it used to be really bad, yeah.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned identity politics because I think in our community there's been progression and more acceptance. But if you look like outside of our community, there are there's a very distinct dichotomy. There is a specific large swath of people who even think of identity politics and they just become enraged because in their world they are being so inundated with it that they just can't deal with it anymore and that it's just liberal media hype.
I'm sorry, I'm drinking their tears right now.
Oh, do their
Ah,
tears
big
taste
swig.
good?
Ah. Ah.
And
Delicious.
truthfully, that's the more difficult argument to battle because those are the people who shut down to it, right? But I've come to realize that those people are much more receptive to LGBTQ plus people when they personally know them as well, which it's sad that it has to get to that, you
Mhm.
know, but like that's why like I sometimes will have people say to me, Donnie, like, do you ever get uncomfortable having to come out all the time to some people? And I'm at the point where I'm like, no, like, not really. Because in my mind, like, in my philosophy, if I come out to someone, I can try to use that as an educational moment, as a means to prove to those people that, hey, I'm not some horrible sexual succubi aimed at, trying to suck the straight out of someone. Not to be too dramatic, of course, but I think that's a lot of what people think. Like they associate LGBTQ plus with like predatory behavior, and
Right.
it's completely like there is no correlation.
Right. That's especially, yeah.
We could have a whole nother episode on how people compare LGBTQ plus people to like pedophiles, right? Because we continually see that comparison drawn, and there is no comparison.
And bisexuals as being like predators, as being like just like I'm after you.
Mhm.
I'm this gluttonous like beast that's just out for sex.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think those are many of the different troubling stereotypes that we need to combat. And I think we will. But the truth is, like, if people want to be educated, they need to be open to that education first. And I
Mhm.
think that the first step in helping them get open to that is by exposure to people in those different groups, right? Taylor says, please do an episode on the sexual spectrum, like ace, demisexual, etc. I think that would be phenomenal.
Sure, we'll add it to the list.
Honestly, like for our next episode, we could probably continue this conversation because we do still like we have not touched on everything that we had on our list, my friends. Hey, Zimzilla99, it's good to see you. Thank you for popping in. I know some people are tuning in now that we're at the end, but once this gets posted, when you get time, you can go back and re-listen to it. So
Yeah,
that's
listen to us on the playback.
That's the one thing I love about live streams. Like sometimes like I'll just like be in the shower and I'll just turn on a live stream and listen to it. Like it's kind of like a podcast when you think about it.
Yeah.
So last chance for anybody to ask any questions in the group chat because Ari and I are going to wrap things up here because we have about a minute and a half left. So as we like as we finish this up, I want to redirect you again to the description section of this video. Let us, like, I mean, of course, let us know if you have any questions about any of the things that we're going to show you, or we're going to have in that area. But we have charities listed down there, lists of charities, links to some reading if you would like to do any reading about like different subjects, like Stonewall riots, for example. We'll have links for you and sources for you as well. Ari, did you have any parting words?
I definitely think that you should look for Trans Crowdfund on Twitter. I use it all the time. I've seen some really good fundraisers on Trans Crowdfund on Twitter. I use it all the time. I have given more money than I have wanted to, because I I mean, you have to be careful because, like, they're not official ones. They're definitely people asking for help,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's definitely my favorite place because it's uh, one-on-one people telling about their lives and asking for help.
And
And
that's important too, because we need to know like the individual experiences and how they've been impacted specifically. And building off from that, I know we're almost done here, but building off from that, I cannot emphasize enough, make sure that you research the places that you want to support as well. Like look at their mission statements, look at what they're about, because there are many different charities that have different agendas or different like places where they direct their funds to. So please, please, please check that out. RP asks, Downey, will you continue Mundane Life of a Gay? Yes, I will be continuing that series at some point soon. All right. Well, that concludes episode 2 of Restitching the Tapestry. This was a great conversation, Ari. Thank you again. Like, I adore you in every conceivable
our
way.
hours go so fast.
I know, like it's really great to see like the amount of conversation we have and still have stuff left over. So I
Yeah,
think we'll definitely probably pick up where we left off and continue this good conversation since well, we do have the rest of June as Pride Month, right? So
yeah.
it's definitely applicable. All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful night. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you rewatch this live stream, feel free to ask questions. We'll be here to answer them. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye.
Bye.